Everybody, Miss Keeter here, ready to go over final for semester 1. So let us go ahead and get started. First, we're going to look at connotation, which is an idea or feeling that a word invokes. Number 1, what is the best description of the connotative meaning of the word immature in this sentence? "You are so immature," Angela shouted, furious that her younger brother had embarrassed her in front of her friends. Answer is A. It has a negative connotation suggesting that Angela's brother is silly or lacks sophistication. What is the meaning of the word cryptic in this sentence? Eli was puzzled to find a sandwich bag with 2 tickets and a cryptic note that contained an address, a time, and a date, but no signature. The answer is A, mysterious. Which option is the best revision of the sentences? The chef baked a cake for the wedding. It was 2 feet tall. Answer A, the chef baked a cake that was 2 feet tall for the wedding. Now I'm going to go ahead and read Tess of D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy's Victorian novel follows Tess, a pure rural girl whose path crosses with the D'Urbervilles, an old and wealthy English family. In this scene, Tess and her admirer, Angel, travel through the English countryside. As they drove on, the fragment of an old manor house of Caroline date rose against the sky and was in due course passed and left behind. "That," he observed to entertain her, "is an interesting old place, one of the several seats which belonged to an ancient Norman family formerly of great influence in this county, the D'Urbervilles. I never pass one of their residences without thinking of them. There is something very sad in the extinction of a family of renown, even if it was fierce, domineering, feudal renown." "Yes," said Tess. They crept along towards a point in the expanse of shade just at hand, at which a feeble light was beginning to assert its presence, a spot where by day a fitful white streak of steam at intervals upon the dark green background denoted intermittent moments of contact between their secluded world and modern life. Modern life stretched out its steam feeler to this point 3 or 4 times a day, touched the native existences, and quickly withdrew its feeler again, as if what it touched had been uncongenial. They reached the feeble light which came from the smoky lamp of a little railway station, a poor enough terrestrial star, yet in one sense of more importance to Talbothays Dairy and mankind than the celestial ones to which it stood in such humiliating contrast. The cans of new milk were unladen in the rain, Tess getting a little shelter from a neighboring holly tree. Then there was the hissing of a train which drew up almost silently upon the wet rails, and the milk was rapidly swung can by can into the trunk. The light of the engine flashed for a second upon Tess Durbeyfield's figure, motionless under the great holly tree. No object could have looked more foreign to the gleaming cranks and wheels than this unsophisticated girl with the round bare arms, the rainy face and hair, and suspended attitude of a friendly leopard at pause, the print gown of no date or fashion, and the cotton bonnet drooping on her brow. She mounted again beside her lover with a mute obedience characteristic of impassioned natures at times, and when they had wrapped themselves up over head and ears in the sailcloth again, they plunged back into the now thick night. Tess was so receptive that the few minutes of contact with the whirl of material progress lingered in her thought. "Londoners will drink it at their breakfasts tomorrow, won't they?" she asked. "Strange people that we have never seen. Yes, I suppose they will, though not as we send it, when its strength has been lowered so that it may not get up into their heads. Noble men and noble women, ambassadors and centurions, ladies and tradeswomen, and babies who have never seen a cow. Well, yes, perhaps, particularly centurions, who don't know anything of us and where it comes from, or think how we drove 2 miles across the moor tonight in the rain that it might reach them in time. We did not drive entirely on account of these precious Londoners. We drove a little on our own, on account of that anxious matter, which you will, I am sure, set at rest, dear Tess. Now permit me to put it in this way. You belong to me already, you know, your heart, I mean. Does it not? You know as well as I. Oh, yes, yes. Then if your heart does, why not your hand? My only reason was on account of you, on account of a question. I have something to tell you. But suppose it to be entirely for my happiness and my worldly convenience also. Oh, yes, if it is for your happiness and worldly convenience. But my life before I came here, well, it is for my convenience as well as my happiness. If I have a very large farm, either English or colonial, you will be invaluable as a wife to me, better than a woman out of the largest mansion in the country. So please, please, dear Tessie, disabuse your mind of the feeling that you will stand in my way. What do paragraphs 1 and 2 most suggest about the old families of rank? Answer, C. By the 19th century, some of the ancient English families had lost their power, wealth, and influence. Whistling my worries away. It was the middle of the summer, and what was I doing? I was up at the crack of dawn taking the bus across town to spend the day with a bunch of 7-year-olds. How did this happen? Why hadn't I said no? Only a couple days earlier, I had been enjoying my usual relaxed summer when the phone rang. My cousin Lucy, my favorite cousin, was almost in tears. You have to help me, she wailed when I answered the phone. Lucy had been working as a camp counselor for the summer. I'm the drama counselor, she said. I helped the kids put on a skit for their parents at the end of camp. Now my dad's got this business trip and he's offering to take my sister and me with him to Hawaii for a month. It will be amazing, but I can't just leave. The camp director really needs my help, and dad says he won't take me unless I can find someone to fill my spot. Will you do it? You're good at plays and all that stuff. I don't do anything with little kids, I argued. I'm an only child and the baby of the family. Tiny tots are not my thing. I have no idea how to do a play with these kids. Lucy snorted. It doesn't have to be fancy, Benito. This isn't like those plays your drama class does at school. Just help them throw together some little skit. Sing a song, dance around a bit. The parents will love it. Besides, she added, the pay's pretty good, and I know you've been saving up for that new computer you wanted. Maybe that was the thing that did it. Maybe was temporarily insane. Maybe I just didn't want to disappoint my favorite cousin. But as I watched 25 first graders romping around the playground, I wondered what on earth was I thinking? The camp director, Camilla, explained that each camp session was 2 weeks long. We're just starting a new session, she said. So these campers never met Lucy. They're all yours. Great, I said, trying to summon up a smile. Camilla rounded up the campers and brought them over to meet me. Benito is a performer, she told them. He's going to teach you a little bit about how to perform, too. Can you do magic tricks? One boy asked as Camilla left. I bet he sings, said a little girl. He looks like, she whispered to her friend, and they both giggled. Maybe he's a ballerina, another boy volunteered, snickering. I could see where this was headed. Time for a change. Let's play a game, I announced brightly. That got their attention. I'm going to shout out an activity. Then we will all pretend to do it. Ready? I started running in place. I'm an Olympic runner, I shouted. I'm going for the gold medal. The kids immediately joined in, only while I ran in place, they ran everywhere. And I mean everywhere. I spent the next 20 minutes keeping them out of the street, away from the field where the high school football team was practicing, and peeling them off the walls of the building when, after they got bored with running, they decided to try to climb a drain pipe. I was relieved when Camilla called them all to lunch. I wasn't a drama counselor, more like a referee. That night, Camilla stopped me as I headed toward the bus stop. I really appreciate the help, she said, especially now. I've applied for a grant to get more money for the camp. The foundation I applied to is really excited that we are starting a drama program. They're even sending a representative to see the presentation in a couple weeks. Of course, they know we're not an acting camp or anything, so they don't expect a big production, but I'm hopeless with skits and stuff. I don't even like to speak to the group of parents. I don't know what I would have done if Lucy hadn't found you to take her place. I was still thinking about her words as I took my seat on the bus. What was I going to do now? I didn't want to be responsible for the entire camp closing. I was too deep in thought to notice the passengers around me until one of them tapped my shoulder. Would you please stop whistling? He said. Sorry, I said. I whistle when I'm nervous. As the days went by, I was doing a lot more whistling. I tried everything, every game I could think of, every skit I could suggest. The kids would listen for a minute or two, but then they were off, running and jumping and shouting at the top of their lungs. I caught a doubtful look on Camilla's face sometimes, as if she wondered how I was going to make a show of this. I wondered too. 2 weeks had passed. I knew all the campers by name, but they hadn't learned anything about performing, and the show was tomorrow night. I took up my familiar spot, watching them run out and whistling under my breath. Benito, you whistle all the time. Can you teach me how? It was Mariana, one of the sweetest, quietest little ones in the bunch. But after only a little coaching from me, she let out a whistle so loud my ears rang. All the other kids came running. Who did that? Mariana? No way. Benito taught me, Mariana piped up, and I was deluged with requests for whistling lessons. At first, I was just grateful they were finally willing to listen to me about anything. Watching them practice, though, I began to get an idea. Hey, campers, I shouted. No one listened. I took a deep breath and gave my loudest whistle, and they all came running. How would you like to show off your whistling skills to your parents tomorrow night? I asked. They loved the idea. Our plan was simple: recreate what just happened. Mariana was thrilled to have the only real lines in the skit, and the other kids got to do exactly what they wanted: run around and whistle. We didn't even really need to practice. The next night's performance was spectacular. The kids were really into it, and the parents loved it. Afterwards, Elizabeth introduced me to the representative of that foundation. Very creative, he said. I know it's not exactly Shakespeare or anything, I began, but he brushed that off. You got them coordinated on a single task. They had fun. They gave a performance. What more do you expect from 7-year-olds? Camilla gave me a grin and a big thumbs up. The campers were saying excited goodbyes. That was the best part of my whole camp, Mariana told me shyly as she gave me a hug. Well, Benito, Camilla said as the last campers and parents left, Lucy comes back from her trip soon, but I really liked what you did with the kids. The job is yours if you still want it. I thought back to my conversation with Lucy just a few weeks ago. I don't even like little kids, I had told her, and I certainly don't know how to do drama with them. You'll figure it out, Lucy had assured me, and she had been right. I smiled at Camilla. I'll take it, I said. I know exactly what to do with the next group of kids. Number 1, how does the exposition function in this story? A, it introduces the narrator and the situation. 2. How does the author use the rising action in this story? A. To increase the pressure on Benito and to keep the reader in suspense about whether he can succeed. 3. How does the author use the falling action in this story? A. To reinforce Benito's success with feedback from the visiting representative. 4. How does their conversation foreshadow the ending of the story? A. Camilla says the final production needs to be good, which increases the tension. However, the visiting representative is satisfied with the simple skit Benito organizes. My cat. A bump of black and white is purring in my bed, and later on at night, I find him near my head. The pillow quakes and quivers like pudding on a plate. He wakes me up at midnight. I sure hope he sleeps late. Read these lines from the poem. The pillow quakes and quivers like pudding on a plate. How does the simile affect the mood of this poem? A. The mood is lighthearted because the comparison created is silly. There are several examples of alliteration in this poem. How does the alliteration affect the tone of this poem? Alliteration is the repetition of the first letter in several words, like Sally sells seashells down by the seashore. A. It creates a humorous tone because the speaker is amused by the cat, even though it keeps the speaker awake. How does the rhyme scheme of this poem affect the poem's mood? A. The poem's simple rhyme scheme creates a lighthearted mood. Excerpt from The Man Who Knew Too Much by G.K. Chesterton. The Man Who Knew Too Much follows the protagonist Fisher and his friend March as they solve crimes in London. Due to his political connections, Fisher is burdened by his knowledge of the secret motivations behind public crimes. Fisher often solves murders only to watch the murderer go free due to the political corruption. You seem to know all about him, observed March with a rather bewildered laugh, and about a good many other people. Fisher's bald brow became abruptly corrugated, and a curious expression came into his eyes. I know too much, he said. That's what's the matter with me. That's what's the matter with all of us. The whole show. We know too much about one another, too much about ourselves. That's why I'm really interested just now about one thing that I don't know, and that is, inquired the other, why that poor fellow is dead. They had walked along the straight road for nearly a mile, conversing at intervals in this fashion, and March had a singular sense of the whole world being turned inside out. Mr. Horne Fisher did not especially abuse his friends and relatives in fashionable society. Of some of them he spoke with affection, but they seemed to be an entirely new set of men and women who happened to have the same nerves as the men and women mentioned most often in the newspapers. Yet no fury of revolt could have seemed to him more utterly revolutionary than this cold familiarity. It was like daylight on the other side of the stage scenery. They reached the great lodge gates of the park, and to March's surprise, passed them and continued along the interminable white straight road. But he was himself too early for his appointment with Sir Howard, and was not disinclined to see the end of his new friend's experiment, whatever it might be. They had long left the moorland behind them, and half the white road was gray in the great shadow of the Torwood pine forests, themselves like gray bars shuttered against the sunshine, and within, amid that clear noon, manufacturing their own midnight. Soon, however, rifts began to appear in them like gleams of colored windows. The trees thinned and fell away as the road went forward, showing the wild, irregular corpses in which, as Fisher said, the house party had been blazing away all day. And about 200 yards farther on, they came to the first turn of the road. At the corner stood a sort of decayed inn with the dingy sign of the Grapes. The signboard was dark and indecipherable by now, and hung black against the sky and the gray moorland beyond, about as inviting as a gallows. March remarked that it looked like a tavern for vinegar instead of wine. A good phrase, said Fisher, and so it would be if you were silly enough to drink wine in it. But the beer is very good, and so is the brandy. March followed him to the bar parlor with some wonder, and his dim sense of repugnance was not dismissed by the first sight of the innkeeper, who was widely different from the genial innkeepers of romance. A bony man, very silent behind a black mustache, but with black, restless eyes. Taciturn as he was, the investigator succeeded at last in extracting a scrap of information from him by dint of ordering beer and talking to him persistently and minutely on the subject of motor cars. He evidently regarded the innkeeper as in some singular way an authority on motor cars, as being deep in the secrets of the mechanism, management, and mismanagement of motor cars, holding the man all the time with a glittering eye like the ancient mariner. Out of all this rather mysterious conversation, there did emerge at last a sort of admission that one particular motor car of a given description had stopped before the inn about an hour before, and that an elderly man had alighted requiring some mechanical assistance. Asked required any other assistance, the innkeeper said shortly that the old gentleman had filled his flask and taken a packet of sandwiches. And with these words, the somewhat inhospitable host had walked hastily out of the bar, and they heard him banging doors in the dark interior. Fisher's weary eye wandered round the dusty and dreary inn parlor and rested dreamily on a glass case containing a stuffed bird with a gun hung on hooks above it, which seemed to be its only ornament. Puggy was a humorist, he observed, at least in his own rather grim style, but it seems rather too grim a joke for a man to buy a packet of sandwiches when he is just going to commit suicide. If you come to that, answered March, it isn't very usual for a man to buy a packet of sandwiches when he's just outside the door of a grand house he's going to stop at. No, no, repeated Fisher almost mechanically, and then suddenly cocked his eye at his interlocutor with a much livelier expression. By Jove, that's an idea. You're perfectly right. And that suggests a very queer idea, doesn't it? There was a silence, and then March started with irrational nervousness as the door of the inn was flung open and another man walked rapidly to the counter. He had struck it with a coin and called out for brandy before he saw the other two guests, who were sitting at a bare wooden table under the window. When he turned about with a rather wild stare, March had yet another unexpected emotion, for his guide hailed the man as Hoggs and introduced him as Sir Howard Horne. He looked rather older than his boyish portraits in the illustrated papers, as is way of the politicians. His flat, fair hair was touched with gray, but his face was almost comically round, and a Roman nose, which when combined with his quick, bright eyes, raised a vague reminiscence of a parrot. He had a cap rather at the back of his head and a gun under his arm. Harold March had imagined many things about his meeting with the great political reformer, but he had never pictured him with a gun under his arm drinking brandy in a public house. So you're stopping at Jinks too, said Fisher. Everybody seems to be at Jinks. Yes, replied the Chancellor of the Esquire. Jolly good shooting, at least all of it that isn't Jinks shooting. I never knew a chap with such good shooting that was such a bad shot. Mind you, he's a jolly good fellow and all that. I don't say a word against him, but he never learned to hold a gun when he was packing pork or whatever he did. They say he shot the cockade off his own servant's hat, just like that, to have cockadoos, of course. He shot the weathercock off his own ridiculous gilded summer house. It's the only cock he'll ever kill, I should think. Are you coming up there now? Fisher said rather vaguely that he was following soon when he had fixed something up, and the chancellor of the Esquire left the inn. March fancied he had been a little upset or impatient when he called for the brandy, but he had talked himself back into a satisfactory state. If the talk had not been quite what his literary visitor had expected, Fisher, a few minutes afterwards, slowly led the way out of the tavern and stood in the middle of the road, looking down in the direction from which they had traveled. Then he walked back about 200 yards in that direction and stood still again. I should think this is about the place, he said. What place? Asked his companion. The place where the poor fellow was killed, said Fisher sadly. What do you mean? Demanded March. He was smashed up on the rocks a mile and a half from here. No, he wasn't, replied Fisher. He didn't fall on the rocks at all. Didn't you notice that he only fell on the slope of the soft grass underneath? But I saw that he had a bullet in him already. Then after a pause, he added, he was alive at the inn, but he was dead long before he came to the rocks. So he was shot as he drove his car down this strip of straight road, and I should think somewhere about here. After that, of course, the car went straight on with nobody to stop or turn it. It's really a very cunning dodge in its way, for the body would be found far away, and most people would say, as you do, that it was an accident to a motorist. The murderer must have been a clever brute. Why does the author choose to include details about the Torwood pine forests and other scenery alongside the road? A, to slow the pacing and increase suspense in the reader to find out why the man is dead. Reread paragraph 8 from the passage. At the corner stood a sort of decayed inn with the dingy sign of the Grapes. The signboard was dark and indecipherable by now and hung black against the sky and the great moorland beyond, about as inviting as a gallows. March remarked that it looked like a tavern for vinegar instead of wine. Why does the author choose to include details about the Grapes Inn? A, to reinforce the dark and somber mood of the story. Read these lines from the passage. I should think this is about the place, he said. What place? Asked his companion. The place where the poor fellow was killed, said Fisher sadly. Why does the author include these lines? D, they inject an element of surprise into the text. Select the phrases from the drop-down menus that best complete the sentence. The narration of the story allows the reader two correct answers. Third person limited and remain engaged in solving the mystery along with the characters. Go Down Moses. Go Down Moses is a Negro spiritual that references the Old Testament and the events of Exodus. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Moses, biblical figure who led the enslaved Israelites out of the bondage in Egypt. Pharaoh is an ancient Egyptian ruler, and smite is to strike. How do the slight variations in the final lines of stanzas 3 and 5, the use of the quotation marks, and the addition of the exclamation point most affect the poem's impact? A, they make it sound increasingly forceful. Which part of the song most emphasizes its singer's demand for freedom? B, the repetition of the line, let my people go. How do the short stanzas and brief lines of the song shape its impact? D, they create a mournful, somber mood in the song. Song of the Wild Bushmen by Thomas Pringle. The Bushmen are indigenous people living in regions of Africa, including Botswana, Namibia, Angola, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. They are one of the earliest hunter-gatherer cultures known to humankind. For centuries, their numbers have dwindled as peoples of other ethnicities and cultures have intruded on their lands, whether to exploit their resources or to change their religious beliefs. Let the proud white man boast his flocks and fields of foodful grain. My home is mid the mountain rocks, the desert my domain. I plant no herbs nor pleasant fruits. I toil not for my cheer. The desert yields me juicy roots and herds of bounding deer. The countless springboks are my flock, spread over the unbounded plain. The buffalo bendeth to my yoke, the wild horse to my rein. My yoke is quivering assegai, my rein the tough bow string. My bridle curb a slender barb, yet it quells the forest king. The crested adder honoreth me and yields at my command, his poison bag like the honey bee when I seize him on the sand. Yea, even the wasting locust swarm, which mighty nations dread, to me nor terror brings nor harm, for I make them of my bread. Thus I am the Lord of the desert land. And I will not leave my bounds, to crouch beneath the Christian's hand and kettle with his hounds, to be a hound and watch the flocks for the cruel white man's gain. No, the brown serpent of the rocks his den doth yet retain, and none who there his stings provokes. Read these lines from the poem. Let the proud man boast his flocks and fields of foodful grain. My home is mid the mountain rocks, the desert my domain. What do these lines reveal about the Bushman's viewpoint? C, the Bushman is scornful of the white man's need to modify the natural environment to survive. Read these lines from the poem. My home is mid the mountain rocks, the desert my domain. I plant no herbs nor pleasant fruits. I toil not for my cheer. The desert yields me juicy roots and herds of bounding deer. What do these lines reveal about the Bushman's viewpoint? A, he appreciates the abundance of nature. Read these lines from the poem. The countless springboks are my flock, spread over the unbounded plain. The buffalo bendeth to my yoke, the wild horse to my rein. What do these lines reveal about the Bushman's viewpoint? A, the Bushman feels the benefits of his lifestyle far exceed those of the white man. Excerpt from The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. At the age of 18 months, Helen Keller was rendered deaf and blind. Unable to read, write, or speak, it was thought that Helen would never be able to communicate. The Story of My Life describes Helen's education with Anne Sullivan and the unorthodox teaching methods that enabled her to learn how to communicate and thrive. We read and studied out of doors, preferring the sunlit woods to the house. All my early lessons have in them the breath of the woods, the fine resinous odor of pine needles blended with the perfume of wild grapes. Seated in the gracious shade of a wild tulip tree, I learned to think that everything has a lesson and a suggestion. The loveliness of things taught me all their use. Indeed, everything that could hum or buzz or sing or bloom had a part in my education. Noisy throated frogs, katydids, and crickets held in my hand until, forgetting their embarrassment, they trilled their ready note. Little downy chickens and wildflowers, the dogwood blossoms, meadow violets, and budding fruit trees. I felt the bursting cotton balls and fingered their soft fiber and fuzzy seeds. I felt the low soughing of the wind through the corn stalks, the silky rustling of the long leaves, and the indignant snort of my pony as we caught him in the pasture and put the bit in his mouth. Ah me, how well I remember the spicy, clovery smell of his breath. Sometimes I rose at dawn and stole into the garden while the heavy dew lay on the grass and flowers. Few know what joy it is to feel the roses pressing softly into the hand or the beautiful motion of the lilies as they sway in the morning breeze. Sometimes I caught an insect in the flower I was plucking and felt the faint noise of a pair of wings rubbed together in a sudden terror as the little creature became aware of a pressure from without. Another favorite haunt of mine was the orchard where the fruit ripened early in July. The large downy peaches would reach themselves into my hand, and as the joyous breezes flew about the trees and apples tumbled at my feet. Oh, the delight with which I gathered up the fruit in my pinafore, pressed my face against the smooth cheeks of the apples, still warm from the sun, and skipped back to the house. Our favorite walk was to Keller's Landing, an old tumble-down lumber wharf on the Tennessee River used during the Civil War to land soldiers. There we spent many happy hours and played at learning geography. I built dams of pebbles, made islands and lakes, and dug riverbeds, all for fun, and never dreamed that I was learning a lesson. I listened in increasing wonder to Miss Sullivan's descriptions of the great round world with its burning mountains, buried cities, moving rivers of ice, and many other things as strange. She made raised maps in clay so that I could feel the mountain ridges and valleys and follow with my fingers the devious course of rivers. I liked this too, but the division of the earth into zones and poles confused and teased my mind. The illustrative strings and the orange stick representing the poles seemed so real that even to this day, the mere mention of temperate zones suggests a series of twined circles, and I believe that if anyone should set about it, he could convince me that white bears actually climb the North Pole. How does the walk to the well house affect what happens next? A, Keller's life is transformed when she is able to make the connection between words and what they represent. What is the significance of Keller's interaction with her teacher at the well house? A, once she understands that everything has a name, she is motivated to learn all she can. How does the event at the well house change Keller's attitude? A, for the first time, she feels a sense of connection with the world around her and looks forward to the future. Resist antibiotics. One night last December, my 1-year-old son, Eli, awoke around midnight crying uncontrollably. I wound up holding him for an entire night, as each attempt to lay in his crib resulted in his siren scream. The next day, the doctor diagnosed the cause of Eli's agony, an ear infection in each of his ears. We left the doctor's office with a prescription of amoxicillin, a common first-line antibiotic designed to destroy offending bacteria. For 10 days, I struggled to give Eli the medicine, finally resorting to mixing it with applesauce and an absurd amount of cinnamon for 10 days. Eli clung to me, showing little improvement, sleeping only a few hours before waking in hysterics. Back at the doctor, Eli still had fluid-filled ears. We left with another prescription, this time for a stronger antibiotic. Flash forward 7 weeks. Eli still had a double ear infection. He had now taken 4 courses of antibiotics, one of which caused his little body to break out in golf ball-sized hives. Still, the next treatment the doctor advised was yet another antibiotic, this time injected directly into his body. Antibiotics clearly weren't working, but as a mother, I was desperate to ease my child's pain. It is true that antibiotics have proven effective in many situations, such as for treating strep throat that has been diagnosed by a culture. Therefore, prescribing an antibiotic is a sound first step for doctors. But Eli's story illustrates what should be startling, but is unfortunately common. Antibiotics are often prescribed to distress patients, even if the antibiotics are clearly not working. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, in 30 to 50% of cases, the antibiotic prescribed is either the incorrect antibiotic or is prescribed for the wrong amount of time. The time patients spend taking that antibiotic is time that they could spend being treated more effectively. Not only do antibiotics often not work, resulting in unnecessary costs and side effects, they can lead to the formation of superbugs. A superbug is a microbe or organism not visible to the naked eye that is resistant to the effects of a drug. In many cases, superbugs are antibiotic resistant. Are antibiotic resistant bacteria. Here's what happens. Scientists develop antibiotics that target specific types of bacteria, or in some cases, many types. Over time, the targeted bacteria changes or develops a way to survive despite the antibiotic. The next time someone with this new resistant bacteria takes the correct antibiotic, the resistant bacteria becomes stronger because, unfortunately, the antibiotic likely killed all the good, helpful bacteria, leaving the superbug to thrive. Every time someone uses an antibiotic is a chance for a resistant strain of bacteria to form or strengthen. In the US, over 10 million people have fallen ill with superbugs. More than 23,000 have died. These numbers can only grow if we don't reevaluate how we use antibiotics. Many patients, however, want to take some sort of action when they or their children are suffering. Unless there is a medical emergency or a clear indication that antibiotics are the best course of action, patients must consider the snowball effect of using antibiotics. Is aiding a superbug worth a small chance of relief? Or is exploring an alternative solution or exercising patience in palliative care the more responsible choice? In addition to over-the-counter prescription of antibiotics to human patients, we need to reevaluate the routine use of antibiotics in agriculture. Many farmers regularly give antibiotics to their livestock, which, as with human antibiotic use, can lead to superbug formation. As a result, resistant bacteria make their way into human bodies through meat consumption and even through plant consumption. Resistant bacteria from the animal's feces make their way into the soil and into crops. Farmers argue that the antibiotics keep their livestock healthy and promote livestock growth. Without hormones, farmers argue livestock would require more food in order to gain weight, which would drive up the cost of meat and negatively impact the environment. But we as a society need to make a choice. Do we want to promote superbugs, or do we want to pay more for meat? Do we want to invest in alternative farming methods, or do we want to die in a few years? Convenience. Convenience versus health, the choice seems obvious. As a society, we need to reinvestigate and regulate antibiotic use. Without regulation, doctors will continue to prescribe antibiotics as they see fit. Antibiotics will become superbug energy drinks faster than scientists can create new ones. Who knows how many superbugs were enabled by helpless Eli's recent antibiotic binge? Next time you find yourself or a loved one ill, educate yourselves before you go to the doctor and make sure that taking an antibiotic is an absolute best course of action. Which information is common to both the essay and the video? A strain of bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics is called a superbug. Which information is common to both the essay and the video? A, more than 23,000 people in the United States have died as a result of superbugs. That brings us to our conclusion for the test review. I'm sure you're all going to do amazing. Hang out for questions and we will chat. Thanks, guys.